The federal courtroom in Dallas crackled with tension as Pam Bondi, Florida's former attorney general, stepped to the plaintiff's table. The air felt charged, as if the wood-paneled walls and stern portraits of legal giants knew a storm was brewing. Judge Andrew H. Stone, perched high on his bench in black robes, gazed down at Bondi with a smirk that betrayed amusement. At 67, his silver hair and weathered face carried the authority of 2 decades on the federal bench. But his expression, condescending, almost playful, would soon prove a grave miscalculation. The packed gallery, filled with reporters, lawyers, and observers, held its breath, sensing the weight of what was about to unfold. "Ms. Bondi," Stone said, his voice booming across the silent room, "I hear you have concerns about judicial proceedings. How novel for a politician to lecture the courts." The deliberate jab, laced with mockery, drew a ripple of unease from the crowd. Bondi, in a crisp burgundy blazer, her blonde hair framing a composed face, met his gaze with steady brown eyes. At 55, she was no stranger to high-stakes battles, having built a career prosecuting criminals and navigating political firestorms. What Stone didn't know was that she'd spent months preparing for this moment, armed with a legal arsenal that would leave him reeling. The case was a civil rights lawsuit alleging systematic voter suppression in Texas, a cause Bondi had championed as a private attorney after leaving public office. Evidence of polling place closures and disenfranchisement, gathered through her work with grassroots organizations, made this more than a routine filing. It was a fight for constitutional rights, with over 50,000 Texans' votes at stake. Stone, known as the Gavel King for his iron grip on his courtroom, saw it as another frivolous suit, a chance to flex his authority. His reputation for dismissing civil rights cases with disdain was legendary, rooted in a worldview shaped by old money privilege and a Harvard law pedigree. Bondi, by contrast, represented a challenge to his traditionalist outlook. A first-generation college graduate, she'd clawed her way through law school while working nights, later becoming a prosecutor who faced down cartels and corrupt officials. Her political career, though polarizing, was built on a fierce commitment to justice, not grandstanding. She knew Stone's history, his pattern of bias, his dismissive rulings, and had studied his every case. The thick folder in her briefcase, brimming with court transcripts and judicial records, was her weapon, ready to expose a judge who believed himself untouchable. The tension had simmered for weeks, fueled by Stone's subtle slights, mispronouncing Bondi's name as Bondi, cutting her off during pretrial motions, rolling his eyes at her citations. Today, as she stood ready to present her opening statement, the gallery sensed a showdown. Reporters scribbled notes, their laptops glowing with drafts of what could be the year's biggest legal story. A court sketch artist captured Bondi's poised stance and Stone's smug grin, an image destined for headlines. The stage was set for a confrontation that would not only decide the case, but also challenge the judiciary's entrenched power, with Bondi as its unlikely architect. The Dallas federal courtroom buzzed with a tense undercurrent as Pam Bondi stood at the plaintiff's table, her burgundy blazer a sharp contrast to the muted tones of Judge Andrew H. Stone's domain. His opening jab, how novel for a politician to lecture the courts, still echoed, a deliberate slight that had set the tone for the civil rights lawsuit over voter suppression. The gallery, packed with reporters, lawyers, and observers, leaned forward, their notepads and laptops capturing every moment of a showdown that felt less like a trial and more like a high-stakes duel. Bondi's composed demeanor, honed from years as a prosecutor, masked the fire building within her, fueled by months of preparation to challenge a judge whose bias had silenced countless voices. Stone, high on his bench, maintained his air of superiority, his silver hair catching the light as he leaned back, smirking. "Ms. Bondi," he said, deliberately mangling her name despite corrections. "Let's hope your evidence is more than political rhetoric." The mispronunciation drew a murmur from the gallery, a small but calculated jab. Bondi's opening statement was precise. "Your Honor, the evidence will show systematic voter suppression violating the constitutional rights of over 50,000 Texans." Stone's bemused expression didn't waver. Serious allegations, Ms. Bondi. I trust you have substance to back them. The first hour laid bare Stone's tactics. He sustained every defense objection, even baseless ones, while interrupting Bondi mid-sentence. When she presented data on polling place closures in black neighborhoods, he questioned its relevance. Speculative at best, he said, waving a hand. Her statistical analysis, showing discriminatory impact, was dismissed as conjecture. The escalation came when Bondi introduced video evidence. Your Honor, we have security footage from 3 polling locations showing eligible voters turned away, she said, holding a tablet. The defense objected, calling it prejudicial. Stone, without glancing at the footage, sustained the objection. Move on, Ms. Bondi. Bondi's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. Your Honor, this is direct evidence of constitutional violations. Stone cut her off, his tone sharp. I said move on. Amateur videos don't impress this court. The gallery stirred, reporters exchanging glances at his dismissive attitude. Even the defense attorneys seemed surprised by his brusqueness. Jurors, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease, shifted in their seats, noting the disparity in treatment. Bondi, undeterred, pressed forward, citing precedents on voting rights, only for Stone to roll his eyes. I'm familiar with the law, Ms. Bondi. Spare us the lecture. Then came Stone's critical misstep. As Bondi reiterated the footage's relevance, he laughed, a deep, condescending bellow that echoed like a slap. Ms. Bondi, he said, still chuckling, I've been on this bench 20 years. Cell phone videos and political stunts might play in the media, but this is a court of law. Real law, not whatever you learn in campaign school. The room fell silent, the weight of his mockery palpable. Reporters froze, pens hovering. A juror's frown deepened, sensing the line crossed from stern to unprofessional. Bondi stood still, her hands on the table, her brown eyes narrowing with a controlled fury backed by legal mastery. Your Honor, she said, her voice now edged with steel. I'd like to approach the bench. Stone waved her off. Not necessary. Move to your next point. But Bondi didn't budge. She reached into her briefcase, pulling out a thick folder that seemed to materialize like a weapon. Before we continue, Your Honor, we need to address procedural matters. Stone's smirk faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. What matters? He asked, his tone betraying caution. Bondi opened the folder, the rustle of papers loud in the hushed room. Your pattern of behavior in civil rights cases over the past 5 years, Your Honor. The gallery gasped, reporters leaning forward, sensing a shift. The defense team looked bewildered. The court reporters typing paused briefly. Stone's knuckles whitened around his gavel. You're out of order, Ms. Bondi. Bondi's lips curved into a faint, confident smile. Actually, Your Honor, I don't think I am. The words, calm but defiant, marked a turning point, signaling that Bondi's preparation, her deep dive into Stone's rulings, transcripts, and reversals, was about to unravel the judge's unchecked authority in a courtroom he'd long ruled as his kingdom. The Dallas federal courtroom was a powder keg, as Pam Bondi's words. Your pattern of behavior in civil rights cases over the past 5 years landed like a grenade in Judge Andrew H. Stone's kingdom. The gallery, a sea of reporters, lawyers, and observers, erupted in hushed gasps, their pens scratching furiously, laptops glowing with drafts of a story that was no longer just about voter suppression, but about a judge's reckoning. Stone's smirk, once a fixture of his authority, vanished, replaced by a flush creeping up his neck, his knuckles white around the gavel. The jurors, their earlier unease now sharpened into focus, leaned forward, sensing a seismic shift in a trial that had become a public trial of the judge himself. Bondi stood resolute at the plaintiff's table, her burgundy blazer a beacon of defiance, the thick folder open before her like a legal arsenal. Your Honor, she said, her voice carrying a prosecutor's precision, I've researched your judicial record thoroughly. The findings are compelling. The word compelling hung like a threat, its weight silencing the room. Stone's eyes narrowed. Ms. Bondi, "You are out of order," he snapped, but his voice wavered, betraying a crack in his 20-year armor. Bondi's faint smile didn't falter. "I don't believe I am, Your Honor." She pulled the first document from her folder, holding it aloft. "Let's start with Morrison versus Texas Secretary of State, 2023, a voting rights case strikingly similar to this one." The gallery stilled, reporters' pens poised. "You dismissed evidence of voter suppression, Your Honor," while mocking the plaintiff's attorney, saying, and I quote, "Leave constitutional law to those who understand it." Gasps rippled through the room. The court reporter's fingers flew, capturing every word. Stone's face reddened. "That case was dismissed on procedural grounds," he countered, his tone defensive. "Was it?" Bondi asked, producing a transcript. "The record shows your comment was personal, not procedural." The case was later reversed on appeal. She laid the document on the table, pulling another. "Then there's Henderson versus Texas Board of Elections, 2022. You dismissed it and sanctioned the attorneys for a frivolous suit. The Fifth Circuit overturned those sanctions, citing your inappropriate and potentially biased conduct." Stone tried to interrupt, but Bondi's voice rose, steady but unyielding. "No apology was issued to those attorneys, was it?" The defense team, visibly rattled, whispered urgently, while jurors exchanged wide-eyed glances, their disapproval of Stone growing. Bondi continued, her rhythm relentless. "Williams versus Texas Department of Public Safety, dismissed after you called the evidence political theater, reversed on appeal. Jackson versus Harris County elections, where you told the attorney to stop wasting time with conspiracy theories, also reversed." Each case, laid out like a card in a high-stakes game, chipped away at Stone's authority. The gallery buzzed, reporters typing furiously, sensing a career-defining story unfolding. Stone gripped his gavel, his face paling. "This is highly irregular, Ms. Bondi," he said, but the words lacked conviction. Bondi pressed on, pulling a thicker document. "Thompson versus Texas Legislature, dismissed after you suggested the plaintiffs find a hobby. Reversed on appeal, with a formal reprimand from the Judicial Conduct Board." The room's silence was deafening, broken only by the court reporter's keys. Jurors, now openly staring at Stone, included one older man whose slow headshake spoke volumes. The defense attorneys looked like they wanted to vanish, their earlier confidence shattered. Bondi saved her most damning blow for last. "And then, Your Honor, there's Davis versus Texas Attorney General, 2021. Stone's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "You told the attorneys, per the transcript, these people need to stop complaining and follow the law like everyone else." The phrase "these people" detonated, its implication clear to all. The gallery erupted in murmurs, reporters scrambling to quote it. "That case," Bondi continued, "was reversed, and your conduct referred to the Judicial Conduct Committee for investigation, which you dismissed as inconclusive." She gestured to her pile of documents. 12 cases, Your Honor, showing a pattern of dismissive behavior, inappropriate comments, and bias in civil rights cases. This isn't speculation, it's documented." Stone seemed to shrink, his supreme confidence crumbling. Bondi's voice took on a new edge. "I move that this court recuse itself due to demonstrated prejudice against civil rights plaintiffs, and that the case be transferred to a judge without this history." The room held its breath, the weight of her motion, a direct challenge to Stone's career, hanging heavy. The Dallas federal courtroom was a crucible of stunned silence as Pam Bondi's motion for Judge Andrew H. Stone's recusal, a direct assault on his 20-year reign, reverberated through the wood-paneled chamber. Her meticulously documented evidence, 12 civil rights cases exposing Stone's pattern of bias, lay stacked on the plaintiff's table, a legal guillotine poised to sever his unchecked authority. The gallery, brimming with reporters, lawyers, and observers, erupted in a frenzy of whispers, their laptops and notepads capturing a moment that transcended the voter suppression lawsuit. Jurors, their faces a mix of shock and respect, stared at Bondi, whose burgundy blazer and steady gaze stood as a beacon of resolve against Stone's crumbling facade. Stone, once the imperious gavel king, sat frozen on his bench, his silver hair disheveled, his knuckles white around the gavel he hadn't dared to strike. His earlier smirk, that condescending laugh at Bondi's video evidence, was a distant memory, replaced by a pallor that betrayed panic. "Ms. Bondi," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, "this is unprecedented." The word hung weakly, a futile attempt to reclaim control. Bondi, her prosecutor's instincts honed, didn't flinch. "What's unprecedented, Your Honor, is a federal judge's documented history of bias against civil rights plaintiffs. My motion stands." The defense attorneys, caught off guard, huddled in urgent consultation, their faces pale. The lead counsel, a seasoned litigator named Richard Hayes, rose hesitantly. "Your Honor, we request a recess to review these allegations." Stone's eyes darted to Hayes, then back to Bondi, as if seeking an escape. "Court is in recess," he muttered, his gavel tapping feebly, a sound that echoed like a death knell. As he retreated to his chambers, the courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters bolted for the exits, phones already buzzing with breaking news. Bondi called for judge's recusal over bias. Bondi calmly gathered her documents, her team exchanging subtle nods, their months of preparation vindicated. The court reporter, her fingers still from the frenetic pace, glanced at Bondi with quiet admiration, her transcript a historic record of a judge's unraveling. The sketch artist's latest drawing, Stone's ashen face, Bondi's poised authority, would soon flood news feeds. Jurors lingered, whispering among themselves, one woman murmuring, "She didn't just come prepared, she came to win." The gallery's energy was electric, a mix of awe and anticipation, as if the room itself sensed the trial's transformation into a broader battle for judicial accountability. Outside, the courthouse corridor became a media storm. Reporters clustered, their cameras rolling as they filed live updates. "Pam Bondi just dropped a legal bombshell," one journalist said into a microphone, while X-posts trended with hashtags like hashtag Bondi vs. Stone. Inside, Bondi's team reviewed their strategy, aware that Stone's recess was a delay, not a defeat. The folder, now lighter but no less potent, had unleashed a cascade of consequences. Bondi's research, court transcripts, appellate reversals, judicial reprimands, had exposed not just Stone's bias, but a systemic flaw in the judiciary, and the world was watching. When court reconvened after an hour, Stone's transformation was stark. His swagger was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped formality that fooled no one. "Ms. Bondi," he said, his voice strained, "your motion is noted. I'll take it under advisement." Bondi stood, her tone unwavering. "Your Honor, given the evidence, 12 cases, multiple reversals, a judicial conduct board reprimand, I respectfully urge an immediate ruling. Justice demands impartiality." The gallery leaned in, sensing her refusal to let Stone dodge the challenge. Hayes, for the defense, stammered, "We object to this spectacle. The motion lacks precedent." Bondi countered swiftly, her voice cutting through. "The precedent, Mr. Hayes, is 28 U.S.C. Section 455, requiring a judge's disqualification when impartiality is reasonably questioned. The evidence speaks for itself." She gestured to her documents, now, with the clerk, their weight undeniable. Stone's eyes flicked to the gallery, where reporters typed furiously, then to the jurors, whose disapproval was palpable. An older juror, his arms crossed, stared at Stone with a look that said trust had been broken. The court reporter's relentless typing amplified the moment's gravity, each keystroke a nail in Stone's reputation. Stone, cornered, tried to deflect. "This court has always upheld the law, Ms. Bondi. Your accusations are inflammatory." Bondi's response was surgical. "They're not accusations, Your Honor. They're facts, corroborated by court records and appellate rulings. The pattern is clear." The room held its breath, the power dynamic inverted. Stone, once untouchable, was now a defendant in his own courtroom, and Bondi's preparation had made it so. As the session paused again, the tension lingered, a promise that this confrontation was far from over, with justice itself hanging in the balance. The Dallas federal courtroom simmered with raw anticipation as Pam Bondi's relentless push for Judge Andrew H. Stone's recusal, a meticulously documented indictment of his bias in civil rights cases, had turned his own bench into a defendant's dock. The gallery, a swarm of reporters, lawyers, and observers, buzzed with frenetic energy, their devices capturing a legal drama that had outgrown the voter suppression lawsuit at its core. Stone's weak deflection, "Your accusations are inflammatory," had crumbled under Bondi's surgical response. "They're not accusations, Your Honor, they're facts." The jurors, their trust in Stone shattered, stared with a mix of awe at Bondi and disdain for the judge, whose silver hair and black robes now seemed a hollow costume. The court reporter's relentless typing and the sketch artist's furious strokes immortalized a moment poised to redefine judicial accountability. Stone, his face a mask of strained formality, gripped his gavel, his earlier swagger replaced by a tremor in his hands. "Ms. Bondi," he said, his voice tight, "this court will not be swayed by theatrics. Your motion remains under advisement." Bondi, in her burgundy blazer, stood unwavering, her prosecutor's instincts razor-sharp. "Your Honor, theatrics are dismissing constitutional violations with laughter. I presented 12 cases, reversals, reprimands, transcripts, showing bias. The law demands recusal under 28 U.S.C. Section 455. Her words, grounded in legal precision, silenced the room, the gallery leaning in, reporters typing furiously as hashtags like hashtag Bondi exposes bias trended on X. The defense team, led by Richard Hayes, scrambled to regain footing. "Your Honor, this is a stunt, lacking legal grounding," Hayes argued, his voice faltering. Bondi countered instantly, her tone unyielding. "The grounding, Mr. Hayes, is in the Fifth Circuit's reversals and the Judicial Conduct Board's reprimand. The record is undeniable." She gestured to her documents. Now, with the clerk, there wait a public indictment. Jurors, including an older woman whose frown had deepened, nodded subtly, their respect for Bondi palpable. The courtroom's air was electric, as if justice itself was being weighed in real time. Stone, cornered, tried to pivot. "This court has upheld justice for 20 years, Ms. Bondi. Your attempt to impugn my record is noted but misguided." His words, meant to restore authority, rang hollow. Bondi seized the opening, her voice rising with controlled fury. "Misguided, Your Honor? In Davis versus Texas Attorney General, you said, these people need to stop complaining and follow the law. That case was reversed, your conduct investigated. That's not justice, it's prejudice." The gallery gasped, the phrase "these people" a damning echo. Reporters scrambled, quoting the transcript verbatim, while the sketch artist captured Stone's ashen shock. The defense requested another recess, which Stone granted with a weak gavel tap, retreating to his chambers like a man under siege. The courtroom erupted, reporters rushing to file stories. Bondi's evidence shreds Judge's career. Outside, the corridor was a media maelstrom, cameras flashing as legal analysts dissected Bondi's strategy live. "She's not just fighting for her case. She's exposing systemic bias," one said on CNN. X posts exploded, with users sharing clips of Bondi's document-by-document takedown, some adding dramatic music to her line about "these people." The Dallas Morning News tweeted a timeline of Stone's controversial rulings, amplifying Bondi's case. Bondi's team huddled during the break, their faces a mix of focus and quiet triumph. Months of late nights, scouring transcripts, cross-referencing appeals, consulting legal historians, had built this moment. The folder, now a symbol of accountability, had unleashed a firestorm, its contents circulating among reporters and legal scholars. A young law student in the gallery whispered to her friend, "She's showing us how to fight power." Jurors, still seated, discussed Stone's behavior openly, their neutrality giving way to respect for Bondi's courage. The court reporter, reviewing her transcript, exchanged a glance with Bondi, acknowledging the historic weight of her words. When Stone returned, his transformation was complete. The gavel king was gone, replaced by a man clinging to procedure. "Ms. Bondi," he said, his voice barely audible, "I'll rule on your motion tomorrow." Bondi stood, her gaze unflinching. "Your Honor, delay risks further prejudice. The evidence demands action now." Her insistence, rooted in law and moral clarity, pushed Stone to the edge. The gallery held its breath, sensing the climax of a confrontation that had exposed not just one judge but a flaw in the system. As Stone hesitated, the weight of Bondi's preparation, her unassailable evidence, her fearless delivery, loomed, promising a resolution that would echo far beyond the courtroom walls. The Dallas federal courtroom was a crucible of stunned aftermath as Pam Bondi's unyielding motion for Judge Andrew H. Stone's recusal, a meticulously documented expose of his bias, had left his authority in tatters. Stone's feeble promise to rule tomorrow hung in the air, a desperate stall that fooled no one. The gallery, teeming with reporters, lawyers, and observers, buzzed with frenetic energy, their devices flashing as they filed stories that had already gone viral. Bondi's evidence crushes federal judge. The jurors, dismissed for the day but lingering, cast glances of admiration at Bondi, whose burgundy blazer and poised demeanor stood as a symbol of justice's triumph. The court reporter's relentless typing and the sketch artist's final strokes of Stone's defeated slump, Bondi's resolute gaze, captured a moment now etched into legal history. Stone, his silver hair disheveled, retreated to his chambers, his gavel untouched, his once imperious presence reduced to a shadow. The defense team, led by Richard Hayes, huddled in disarray, their earlier confidence shattered by Bondi's relentless evidence. 12 civil rights cases, each a damning reversal or reprimand. Bondi calmly gathered her documents, her team exchanging quiet nods, their months of preparation vindicated. The folder, its contents now with the clerk, had unleashed a storm that transcended the voter suppression lawsuit, exposing a judge's prejudice and igniting a broader reckoning. As the courtroom emptied, the corridor erupted into a media circus. Reporters swarmed, cameras rolling as they broadcast live. Pam Bondi just dismantled a federal judge with court records, one said on MSNBC. X was ablaze, with clips of Bondi's line, "That's not justice, it's prejudice," amassing millions of views. TikTok videos slowed her document-by-document takedown, set to dramatic music, while hashtag Bondi exposes bias trended globally. The Dallas Morning News published a timeline of Stone's rulings, corroborating Bondi's claims, while the Texas Tribune revealed they'd been probing similar complaints but lacked Bondi's evidence. The sketch, Stone's ashen face, Bondi's steady resolve, became a cultural icon, shared across platforms. By evening, the legal world was in chaos. Harvard Law's Sarah Martinez tweeted, "Bondi's advocacy is a masterclass in holding power accountable." Conservative commentator Tom Bradley called it a calculated spectacle, but his dissent was drowned by praise. 3 legal organizations, including the ACLU, demanded an investigation into Stone's conduct. The Federalist Society's silence spoke volumes. Bondi's inbox flooded with messages. Law students inspired to fight bias, civil rights attorneys sharing their own stories of judicial prejudice, a retired judge lauding her courage. "You've given us a blueprint," one wrote. The next morning, Stone didn't appear. His clerk delivered a statement. Due to health concerns, Judge Stone has taken indefinite medical leave. The case is transferred to Judge Maria Rodriguez. The phrase health concerns was a transparent exit, fooling no one. Legal experts saw it as a career's end, orchestrated by Bondi's evidence. The Judicial Conduct and Disability Committee announced it was reopening its investigation into Stone, citing new evidence of potential bias. 3 cases Bondi referenced, Morrison, Henderson Davis, filed motions to reopen, alleging judicial misconduct. The Justice Department began reviewing Stone's civil rights cases, a probe spanning a decade. Bondi's victory was both personal and seismic. Her office buzzed with calls from attorneys nationwide, their stories of biased judges echoing her fight. Law schools invited her to speak on judicial accountability, with professors hailing her research as a model. CNN's Jeffrey Toobin called it the most effective courtroom advocacy in decades. Even Fox News' Andrew Napolitano, a conservative, praised her impeccable evidence. The voter suppression case, now under Judge Rodriguez, saw Bondi's video evidence admitted, becoming the cornerstone of a federal case that would yield a multi-million-dollar settlement and election reforms. The broader impact reshaped the judiciary. The Judicial Conference mandated bias training for civil rights cases, while the American Bar Association updated guidelines for reporting misconduct. Law schools taught Bondi's protocol, her research methodology, as a template for challenging bias. Stone's retirement, announced 6 months later to spend time with family, surprised no one. His replacement, a civil rights attorney confirmed by bipartisan vote, symbolized a shift. Bondi's stand inspired attorneys to document bias in their courts, sparking similar challenges nationwide, each citing her Dallas triumph as precedent. The courtroom's legacy was a symbol of accountability. Bondi's preparation, transcripts, reversals, moral courage, proved that systemic bias could be challenged with evidence and resolve. For young lawyers, especially women, her victory was a beacon, showing expertise could topple entrenched power. The case files, now in the National Archives, stood as a testament to a day when one attorney's truth spoke louder than a judge's gavel, reminding all that justice, though delayed, could prevail when someone dared to fight. The Dallas federal courtroom, though now quiet, remained a hallowed ground where Pam Bondi's seismic victory over Judge Andrew H. Stone had redefined justice's reach. Her relentless evidence, 12 civil rights cases exposing Stone's bias, had forced his medical leave, a thinly veiled retreat that marked the end of his 20-year reign. The voter suppression lawsuit, reassigned to Judge Maria Rodriguez, had become a landmark case, but the true triumph lay beyond the courtroom. Bondi's stand had ignited a movement, exposing systemic judicial bias and proving that preparation and courage could topple even the most entrenched power. The gallery's frenetic energy, the reporters' viral stories, and the jurors' admiring glances lingered as echoes of a day that changed the legal landscape. Bondi, in her burgundy blazer, had left the courthouse that day facing a media storm but offered only a measured comment. Justice isn't about spectacle, it's about truth. Her words, clipped and shared across X, CNN, and TikTok, encapsulated a career defined by principle over posturing. The sketch of her poised resolve against Stone's ashen defeat became a cultural artifact, framed in law offices and shared in classrooms. Her folder of evidence, transcripts, reversals, reprimands, now housed in the National Archives, was studied by scholars and activists as a blueprint for accountability. The Dallas Morning News called it a masterclass in legal warfare, while the Texas Tribune credited Bondi with giving voice to decades of suppressed complaints against Stone. The fallout reshaped the judiciary and beyond. The Judicial Conduct and Disability Committee's reopened investigation into Stone led to formal charges of misconduct, with findings that his bias had tainted dozens of rulings. 3 cases Bondi cited, Morrison, Henderson, Davis, were overturned, freeing wrongfully dismissed plaintiffs to seek justice. The Justice Department's decade-long review of Stone's cases uncovered further injustices, prompting appeals and settlements that restored voting rights for thousands. The voter suppression case itself, under Rodriguez, ended in a $10 million settlement and court-ordered election reforms, with Bondi's video evidence, once mocked by Stone, praised as irrefutable by the new judge. Bondi's influence soared. Law schools from Harvard to Howard taught Bondi's protocol, her methodology of documenting judicial bias as a cornerstone of advocacy. Young lawyers, especially women and minorities, saw her as a beacon, proof that expertise could dismantle institutional prejudice. Civil rights groups hailed her as a hero, inviting her to speak at conferences where she emphasized systemic reform over personal victory. This wasn't about one judge, she told NPR, but about ensuring every American gets equal justice. Her congressional allies push for transparent judicial reporting, mandatory bias training, and streamlined misconduct complaints, citing her Dallas stand as evidence of need. The broader cultural impact was profound. The American Bar Association's updated guidelines empowered attorneys to challenge biased judges, while the Judicial Conference's new training became mandatory for federal courts. Stone's replacement, a civil rights attorney, symbolized a judiciary inching toward equity. Across the country, attorneys filed similar challenges, each nodding to Bondi's precedent. The Bondi effect, as legal scholars dubbed it, inspired a wave of accountability, with biased rulings in California, Georgia, and Ohio overturned using her research tactics. Law students debated her strategy in mock trials, while documentaries framed her as a pivotal figure in judicial reform. Politically, Bondi's stock rose, though she remained focused on justice over ambition. Republicans, wary of attacking her after conservative legal voices like Andrew Napolitano praised her unassailable case, softened their rhetoric. Democrats courted her for higher office, but she deflected, prioritizing voter rights advocacy. Her speeches, laced with her prosecutor's grit, galvanized audiences, urging them to document injustice. "Someone's always watching," she told a packed auditorium at Yale Law, a phrase that became a rallying cry for activists. Ex-users turned it into a hashtag someone's watching, alongside clips of her courtroom lines, keeping the moment alive. The legacy of that Dallas day was a testament to one woman's resolve. Bondi's preparation, late nights poring over transcripts, cross-referencing appeals, proved that truth, wielded with discipline, could shift systems. For the marginalized, her victory showed the law could still serve justice. For judges, it was a warning. No robe conferred immunity from accountability. The National Archives case files stood as a monument to a moment when systemic bias met its match in a single attorney's evidence. As America grappled with its divides, Bondi's stand offered hope that courage and facts could prevail, ensuring that justice, though hard won, was never truly denied.